All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining another ARD Community Webcast. Today we're presenting on the integration between Ranorex Test Automation Tools and ARD. On the phone, we have Josh Taylor and Bill Guastalla from CA. They're on the ARD product team. And we also have George Kapeller from Ranorex. They're going to be going through the presentation today and also giving a short demo as well. If you have any questions as we're going through today's session, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. That'll appear in the right-hand panel of your screen. If you do not see the Q&A box, you can look at the top right and you'll see a box with a question mark in it. Click on that to maximize the Q&A box. You can put your questions in there, and we'll go ahead and get to those at the end of the session today. At the end of the session, we'll also be opening it up for verbal questions. So if you have any questions you'd rather ask over the phone, you can hold them until the end, and we'll open it up at that time. All right, I'm now going to turn the call over to Josh. Take it away, Josh.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm not going to take up too much time here because I really want to get to the demo as quickly as you can. But I just want to kick this conversation off, actually, by talking about continuous delivery. And kind of the bottlenecks which are causing us to kind of miss the bar, so to speak. So, you know, a couple of key facts which I'm always really interested in is 64% of defects kind of originate from the requirement stage. You know, getting as shift left as possible and detecting these earlier in the cycle is going to really enable us to get to this continuous delivery factor and start pushing out quality code a lot quicker. You know, there's the other stat which I'm always really interested in is the change in requirements. I mean, having change comes in affects everything in our entire process so dramatically. And the number 70% of delays caused by this change is just incredible. And then the third stat I really care about is the 70% of test cases which is manual. You know, we've kind of seen this adoption of automated testing, and people always seem to hit bottlenecks of trying to get there. So hopefully we can kind of hit on the solution here of ARD and Ranorex together, trying to hit this continuous delivery cycle. So if we keep going on, something in particular which ARD kind of causes is having a look at how this current delivery system works. You know, usually we get a user, they specify what kind of functionality they want. Then the business analyst comes in, you know, we record this information, write it down, try and make some kind of requirement. The programmer thinks he knows what they both want, designs his, and then the tester comes in, also trying to understand what to do. And none of these things are really aligned. And, you know, based on those stats we were just looking at, getting this right earlier on in the life cycle is going to be hugely beneficial. But this is how it exists today. There's not a lot of clarity, and kind of that's where real big problems start to come out. So this is also where ARD comes in. So we try and bring these individual cycles together, make one pure, central, coherent message. And through that, we can hopefully get closer and closer to continuous delivery. So ARD, the brilliant thing we can do with this is we get to model requirements. Requirements in a flowchart are unambiguous. They're also easy to share, easy to collaborate, easy to make better requirements. We can also automatically generate test cases. And the great thing about ARD is I can say exactly, you know, I want the maximum coverage. I want the maximum coverage for the minimum set of test cases. So ARD is very good at that. Again, we get to automatically generate these because they come from this flowchart which represents our requirement. The great thing is that change problem we were talking about earlier, change now means you just have to update the ARD model. You don't have to update your test cases. And that means you get these auto-updating test cases. So we really lift that bottleneck. And at the end of the day, if we have better requirements, we have better coverage, and we have auto-updating test cases, it lets us get to better software faster. It lets us get to continuous delivery. What's really magic is if you get those principles and then say, okay, I completely get how ARD can work, what if we start overlaying this model with even more valuable assets? So we can first put the test data required to execute those tests. And then the real beautiful part is, okay, let me put some automation code on top of this. So my model is not only representing my requirement, but also has executable automation code. And that's where our great partnership with Ranorex comes in. So if ARD is automatically generating these test cases, if these test cases can be run by Ranorex, amazing. I've got these automated set of test cases which are self-healing, they've got better coverage, and they all come from the better place of being modeled by requirements. This is a perfect kind of story to hit the continuous delivery system. I mean, this solves all the bottlenecks I was talking about earlier. And this is why we're so excited to work so closely with Ranorex, actually. And with that moment, I'm just going to pass the ball over to George, who is going to take us through a couple of items on Ranorex's key elements. So, do you want me to flick through for you, George?
All right, thank you. Thank you. So now that's my slides. Hello, everybody from my side. So I'm George from Ranorex, and I just want to give you a quick overview of how we do test automation, basically. So you can think of doing test automation mainly as, or very similarly as if you were to create a manual test case. And then you just tell Ranorex, okay, run this test case, and Ranorex will then behave like a real tester. So it will hijack your mouse, it will hijack your keyboard, and replay or perform the test case that you first created in a very similar manner as if you would have created a manual test case. So to be able to understand how Ranorex does this, I want to quickly go through some of the key concepts that we have with Ranorex, because these are the concepts that we then will merge with the concepts that you already know from ARD. So first of all, I want to go through the technologies on my first slide, just quickly introduce you to what we are actually capable of doing. So you probably have already experienced this with some test automation tools, so maybe with a Java tool that only knows Java, or with some .NET that only can automate .NET. So with Ranorex, you get all these technologies in one tool. So if you have a desktop application, we are very likely to support this desktop application for test automation. Of course, we also support web. So if you're having a web application which runs on Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Edge, whatever, so you can also automate this. And we also support mobile. So if you have on your iPhone or your Android tablet, if you have an app to test, you can also do this with Ranorex. So you have really one tool to capture them all. So on the next slide, you will see Ranorex Studio, which is really like the core component that we have built. And you will also be working a little bit with Ranorex Studio within this integration of ARD and Ranorex, because this is like the central point of communication for test automation. What you see on the left side is the so-called test suite. So the test suite contains test cases. These test cases, so test case is really nothing more than a test case that you're used to from manual testing, right? So these test cases contain test modules. On these modules contain test steps. So basically these modules, I'm going to talk a little bit about this later. They're just an intermediate layer that we have for usability, but you can think of a test case as a bunch of test steps actually that are joined within the test suite. So on the right hand, you see the report, you see a nice green circle, and the report basically tells you if something went wrong, what went wrong, and where did this go wrong, right? So from this report, you can then very quickly see where the error was, jump to this place in Ranorex, and then correct the error, and also get from there to ARD, right? So usually, I'll tell you on the next slide. Usually, what I used to tell where this Ranorex fits in is we have on the left side continuous integration systems like Jenkins, Hudson, also like CA tools, which usually trigger the Ranorex test execution, like for example a nightly build. And on the other hand, of course, you have test management tools where you manage your manual and your automated test cases, and automated with Ranorex, of course. So now there's this, let's say, third dimension, right, which is Agile Requirements Designer, because Agile Requirements Designer, so if you go to the next slide, Agile Requirements Designer is really this thing which is much more than just a test management tool, all right. So Ranorex has a layered architecture. The first layer, it's important to understand, it's what we call the Ranorex library. So it's a .NET API whose purpose is to really abstract away all the differences of the underlying technologies. So for example, if you look at on Windows. If you look at Java, Java can be automated quite easily when you're within Java, but it's quite hard to automate if you're like on Qt, for example. So the library really abstracts away all these technical differences. And also if you use browsers, for example, Runx does not care whether you want to automate on Chrome, on Internet Explorer, Firefox, whatever you wish. And also, again, for mobile devices, if you want to use if you want to use Android or use an Apple device, Runx really doesn't care because we have this library that abstracts away all the technical differences. So on the second layer, what you see is the so-called repository. Yeah, that was actually right, second layer. There you go. So on the second layer, we have the so-called repository. So our approach of doing test automation is not that we, take a screenshot and then try to figure out pixel-wise, is this a button, is this a checkbox, is this an edit box? But we really sit within the application. So Runx hooks into this application and gets the so-called object tree out of this application. So the object tree, you can think of this as the internal representation of the application of its elements, basically. So every UI element sits somewhere in this object tree. Now, what we need to do is we need to find an element in this object tree to be able to automate, right? And finding this element is done by the so-called Ranorex path. So Ranorex path is just a way to describe how to traverse this object tree to say, okay, this, for example, user log in input field. Now we have a web example, for example. Where is this input field located in the object tree? Now, as a Ranorex test automation engineer, you do not really say, okay, I want to automate this or that UI element, but you say, I want to automate this or that repository element. So the repository is just an intermediate layer between the UI and the actions that you take. So that means an action is always performed, like let's say a key press action or click action, is always performed on a repository item, and the corresponding UI item is found by traversing the application object tree according to the Ranorex path, right? So that sounds a little bit complicated maybe, but we have, on the next slide, I want to show you a tool which is called the RunXPi, which really helps you in doing this. You do not really need to create your Ranorex paths by yourself, but we have this rather awesome tool, I'd say, which is the RunXPi, where you can track elements. So if you click on the track button on the top left of RunXPi, then you can hover over any element. Like, for example, I hovered over download trial, which is the button on our home page. And Ranorex will generate the Ranorex path for you. And if you have this Ranorex path, you can easily create a repository element out of it. And then you can take any action that you want, for example, a click or a key press action on this repository item that you created from this Ranorex path. All right, and on the third layer, we have the so-called modules. So in Ranorex, we work a lot with so-called action-based modules, which are modules where for a tester, you say, I want to perform a click on that repository item or a key sequence on this other repository item. So that's very, very easy to use. On the other hand, on the right side, we have also code modules, which are much more flexible, but you also need to be able to code. So with the ARD integration that Bill will demonstrate in a minute, you will see that we are using code modules, but all this complexity of the code modules that we have in Ranorex basically gets abstracted away by ARD, because ARD is doing a very good job in mapping out what the user needs to take actions, right? So I think we're actually ready. Maybe I'll move over to Bill. So Bill has been the lead developer on this integration, I guess. And yeah, let's see what it is capable of doing.
Hiya. Yeah, so I'm just going to show you an example of a model that tests a web store, which is a kind of web application. Well, it's just a website, simple website where you can choose a product and you can order it. And it's basically a long form. There's a bunch of steps. You enter some information. And the thing that's important to us about the website is that there's a bit of validation in there. So if I enter a poorly formed email, for instance, I'll be told about it. So you can go through each of the steps. You choose your product, you choose a place to deliver it to, you choose some shipping details and your card details, and then you can order your product. So there's a model here that we've designed in advance which goes through basically each page of this web store. And what happens, yeah, you can see that basically each column here in the model kind of represents a page. At the start, these green blocks confirm that each page is loaded. And then there's some action, usually in a decision block, because there's some behavior. So this model's been prepared completely. So inside it, you'll find in the automation tab, you'll find a bit of code there, which is what we're going to use to actually perform the action of the step. Those, as per usual with automation in general, what's going to happen is when we go and produce our paths, a script's going to be made for each path, and that's just going to add together the combination of the sequence of blocks and decision outputs, the sequence of code snippets from each of those blocks and decision outputs to make a script. So if I just open up the project, we've prepared a repository for the project, for the web store, and I've actually organized the objects, as Georg was talking about. This is the object repository. I've organized the objects into folders. So, and you can actually see the UI, an image of each of the UI elements. So for instance, this is the first page, the product catalog, and you can see the product catalog header here. So all of our objects have been tracked, and if you want to do that, you can use the RunXPi to add objects. So what we want to do is see how we can import these objects into Agile Designer. So if I go back to our flowchart and I go to the automation connector, I can choose Ranorex from the drop-down of frameworks, and I can pick up this RX rep file, which is the object repository of your Ranorex project. And if I open that up, I can actually see the same objects in a similar way to the way that they're displayed in Ranorex. So if I wanted to add an action on an object to a block, for instance, I could drag that object onto the block that I wanted to perform the action with. So say there's a block here which enters a postcode. I could pick, you can see it's in the delivery location page. I could say maybe I want to validate that the postcode exists first. I can drag this object okay, so if I want to make a new block or something, I can drag it onto an empty space, and I can choose an action for it. So if I you can see that there's the type of the object here, which is something that's specified by Ranorex, and then there's a bunch of available actions. So I can choose to click it, or I can enter some text into it, or I can just validate that it exists. So if I click OK, it will create a block, and I can have a block which actually will actually perform this action. So in the connector, I can also actually edit the properties of the objects from Agile Designer. So if I, using Ranorex, so if I right-click an object, I can open it in the SPI, and it will actually open up the Ranorex SPI and find the object. I and we can modify it. So we could actually edit the object itself, or we can rename it to something else. And if I change the, if I save my changes, the corresponding changes are applied in Agile Designer. So basically, Agile Designer reacts to the changes in the object repository that you're using. And you'll notice behind this, there's also a notice which is letting me know that the properties of some of the objects have changed, and they've already been used in the flowchart. So they'll be updated within the flowchart. So if I go to Path Explorer and have a look at some of the paths here, you can see there's a bunch of test cases here. And I can export the scripts that produced from these test cases. And what's special about this is that there's a bunch of extra layers. So in the recording code layer here, you can see all of the actions for the script. And in the other layers, there's basically, these are merged scripts which will produce all of the details about the script. And when you export these to your project, your Ranorex will know about where the scripts are and will know that they exist. So you don't have to manually re-import your scripts each time you export from Agile Designer. So if I go to the web store, there's something slightly different about the design of this project. Since we handmade the project, the entire group of tests that we exported will be ran in one go. When we hit play here, I'll just stop this, and that's the end of the demo if there's any questions.
Okay, just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can put them into the Q&A box that's in the right-hand panel of your screen. Or at this time, if you'd like to ask a question over the phone, you can do that. You can do that by clicking #6 on your telephone keypad to unmute yourself. Give it just a second for any questions to come in. Okay, if there are no more questions, I think we'll go ahead and close up for today. Thank you so much to Josh, George, and Bill for presenting today. Great job, guys. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining. If you do have any questions that you think of later on, you can feel free to put them into the community. We have a team constantly monitoring the community site to answer any questions you have. So you can always go there or reach out to any of us on the call today. I have a poll up. Please let us know what you thought of today's topic. We take your feedback and use it when scheduling out future events, so it's really valuable to know how you guys felt about the topic today. All right, thank you everyone so much. I hope everyone has a great day, and we will see you out in the communities. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.